I certainly don't mean to pick on humanity. And I don't want to give anyone the molecular blues. But to get the game going tonight, let me point out to you again that humanity is still forced to talk seriously. I'm talking about these serious people in life, these serious moral, political, philosophical leaders right today are still talking about the absolute necessity to do away with conflict, that humanity is going to kill itself. And, of course, one camp, one group continues to point out that we seem to be making some progress, albeit a step forward and a half a step back, certain pitfalls along the way, but we are surely, the large powers on this planet seem to be getting closer to overcoming their conflicts, their childish prejudices toward one another. And there they stand on television, $1,000 suits, Harvard educated, and they seem to mean so well. And they seem to be conveying some message that has real validity. But if you think that life does not use humanity in the same repetitious, mechanical, habitual way that you use your spleen and duodenum, then you're blind. You're caught up in it. Because that is the same thing that men and women were saying 1500 BC, 1000 AD, 1500 AD, and last week. And it has not changed. As I said, of course, it's not an attack on humanity because life still has some purpose in mind. It is still thinking about this. But it appears to be of supreme consequence to humanity that something be done about conflict, that something be done about the dissension, that in some way humanity must become more intellectually or morally enlightened so that there are not conflicts religiously or over political ideologies, that is some proof to one segment of humanity's forced consciousness of our own low level. But again, they cannot see that they are mouthing words that are at least 2,000 years old, have not changed that much. No matter how you translate them from other times and other places, the intent is still there. But every generation that comes along in the genetic race of man, and those members of it that are forced to play out these kinds of roles, cannot see it. Now, of course, you should be able to understand that if I am giving a fair verbal description, it would not be expedient for them to see it, to say the very least. Or else our secretaries of state, our philosophical, political commentators would suddenly want to stand up and say some sort of word about the need for humanity to outgrow religious and political differences and work together for the common weal. If they start to do that and suddenly realize, good grief, I have read the same thing pre-Caesar. The guys in the Greek Forum were talking like that. Everybody's been saying that. I'm saying the same thing, and I suddenly felt as though it was something original with me and something that was necessary. Wait a minute. Life, genetic pool, cosmic forces, Mercury being in the house of Venus, something is playing games with me. I can't go out and do that. These people I'm going to address, they're educated. A lot of them I went to school with. They're suddenly going to realize that I am saying the same kind of thing, you know, that Flavius Sam said 20 BC. They read those same reports, and I was about to say the same thing, and I'm not consciously or even unconsciously stealing from the man, but something's going on to make me have to say that. People have still not blown up the planet. Large segments of people do kill off one another periodically, but they do not destroy the planet, although history, by all horizontal reports, seems to run in a kind of staggered fashion. Things do move in a manner that by any definition is progressive. that things are better off for everyone by any definition now than they were 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It is not a matter of paradise lost. It is a matter that something in the molecular structure of human consciousness knows that something is amiss, and it places the idea of a completeness always in the past, that in some way we were complete and then lost it. But it would seem to be, throughout history and right now, for me to wrap up some of the verbal descriptions, that humanity is forced to make some note that dissension, childish, useless, irrational conflict of ideas, feelings, are tearing humanity asunder and may eventually spell our destruction, and that something must be done about it. The information lacking, and of course the ability to perceive the information, that if it were presented in a certain way at a certain time for humanity to hear it as a whole. But what is missing is the ability to see that life has its own partnership and is working via humanity. The conflicting opinions, when it's apparently Jews against Arabs or Muslims or Christians, different sects against one another, different races against one another, nationalistic feelings, as it's called, that give rise to conflicts. Those are seen as being somehow childish, feral, irrational, seen absolutely as a stumbling block, something that must be eradicated. And it is simply not true. What that is a reflection of is life's own partnership. It has its own partnership the same way that you seem to be two people inside. Two possible modes of consciousness, awareness. There seems to be two brains. There seems to be two levels of consciousness. Look at all it's been called. There seems to be two spirits in man, a good one and a bad one. Seems to be two perceptions of reality, one that's conscious and can speak, and one that seems to be murky and works in ways that only the unconscious and Freud and Musky's secret seem to know. The point is that humanity, as far back as the yellow circuit has been operative, has the undeniable sensation, no matter how it's described, that there is a partnership arrangement. Even given that many people now will mouth their agreement that man has a conscious and an unconscious mind, for instance. Humanity's consciousness cannot look upon life, cannot look upon what seems to be out there, and see that there is a similar arrangement. They don't have to know my terms, the body of life or the life of life. They cannot see that humanity, operating as a total organism, has its own partnership, as it must. There must be a full situation. If you begin to get a glimpse of that, all of your notions of conservative versus liberal political ideologies, whatever your genetic background is that makes your own partnership or part of it want to take sides in what you hear to be religious battles in other parts of the world, even your feeling that there should be a more enlightened, humane attitude, one man for another, as opposed to the kind of narrow, prejudicial, religious-based, outdated ideas, you keep looking for a one-track railroad. As long as you're doing that, you are expecting not God to come to Cleveland, but you're expecting the straight line phenomenon to become a reality. You're expecting life's own partnership arrangement to commit partial suicide. You're expecting the so-called heaven, paradise. You're expecting that everything will suddenly be unopposed, and it's not possible. Or if it's possible, all growth would stop, and very shortly all breathing would stop. Life would stop. See if you can see a connection between some other areas and this. No matter how it would seem at first blush, or in some cases after some pondering, words are basically uncharged. that they are not within themselves in some isolated way either a positive or a negative statement. And ordinarily, again, consciousness has no perception of this. That if we were dealing with a partnership operating under its normal arrangement, just your ordinary line level consciousness, to you all words have a charge to them. Now there would be some examples of E-type words, of things that you're not interested in, but I've tried to point this out enough to you that you should understand that there is nothing immediately to be gained from that other than for you to see that you are not normally aware of the fact that those things which do not interest you might as well not exist. That if you are not wired up to find certain ideas, certain activities to be of interest to you, that gives a true meaning to my E category of being irrelevant. But other than those cases that you do not normally notice, ordinary consciousness would say that all ideas, all words, at least strung together to make an idea that is conceivable and cogent, would have a positive or negative charge. And what if, in a family arrangement, let us say, an old man says, he calls around his family, he says, I have just learned I am dying. Well, let's assume that he's just an ordinary run-of-the-mill gent. We could assume that he would find that to be a negative statement. That the doctors have convinced him, and now he has said it for the first time. After the doctors left, he said, I am dying. And he didn't even like to hear it. We could have one son there, or one daughter, that could suddenly collapse, fall, hug the old man. And we could say, well, they obviously find it to be a negative statement. We might look over and find one of the other progenies looking off in a sort of a calculating manner, and we might find out that this child was not very close to the old man, and in fact, if the truth be known, he finds the statement from his father, I'm dying, to be a rather positive statement, because he is already calculating, since he has had access to the will, he's wondering how long the old man can hang on and how he'll start to spend the money. In other words, literally, he may find that to be a positive statement for the old man to say, I'm dying. Or for a woman to announce, hey, I'm pregnant. And she just beams and smiles. And as seems to be the case in ordinary humanity a large part of the time, the man to whom she announces this may not find that to be such a positive statement. Now, don't just stop somewhere that all of this is relative. That's not the way things are arranged. That's not the way consciousness sees it. Consciousness would ordinarily take statements, that is, ideas, words put together in ideas, in which the particular observer had any interest. It would find all statements to be intrinsically charged to what you just told me. You just told me, no, you will not give me the loan I wanted. That is a negative statement. The idea, the energy that this banker, this loan officer, has just transferred to me across his little desk is negative. Whereas someone tells him that some other deal in which he had an interest has come through, and he finds that to be a positive statement within itself, and it is not. That words and ideas in isolation are uncharged. There is no charge to it. Now, I'm not going to stop and belabor that, except for to note for you that at the ordinary level, that's not true. If you're missing the additional dimension, what I've just said is not true. Ordinary consciousness can, in its own fashion, even disprove it, but it doesn't have to. It would just dismiss that. That's not true. That there are statements, if somebody I love told me they were dying, that's a negative statement. If there was something in which I had an interest and I wanted, such as a loan for a new business, and the people to whom I applied for the loan said, no, you can't have the loan, the words, the idea is negative, and it's not. The ordinary consciousness it is, but it's not. Let me see if I can drag you a little further. If you have knowledge of only two axes, that is, I could call it the C and the D force. If that's all you have knowledge of, you have knowledge vis-a-vis this kind of activity, what you people should be after, the knowledge you have is it is ultimately non-informative. It is non-expansive. There is nowhere you can go with it. If you could, no one would be seeking to be religious. No one would be seeking some extraordinary journey. No one would be trying to do this kind of thing, because everything would be self-evident. There would be no questions. There would be no non-material questions. Anything else you could learn. But it would have to be that the information available regarding two of the forces would have to be self-explanatory. It would have to be satisfying, and it's not so. Can you see any connection between that and what seems to be this partnership arrangement in you and in life? That if this was the possibilities, and we were talking about two forces out of the three that's necessary to make any activity operate on this level. The optimum that would be happening would be that those two would take up 2/3 of the possibilities. Now, it's not even necessary that it take up 2/3 of the possibilities. It could be down, this is no great importance right now, but they could be down to that kind of level. It's a matter of somewhere between the minimum, which it takes, or you or no ordinary person would be conscious of the activity, all the way to this. That would be, as far as ordinary consciousness, that would be almost calamity time. If the two forces operating at 2/3 of the possibilities of all reality, you're talking about serious business. You're talking about a doctor just told you you're going to die next week. Your broker just called and said, are you in a tall building? If so, get away from the windows. You have just lost everything. But this information in life, at life's level, in humanity, and at your ordinary level, is non-informative. It answers nothing. It satisfies nothing. But in the partnership arrangement, what you've got is you've always got at least 1/3 of the possibilities extant on this level that gives room for the other two to dance. If they did not have room to dance, this would be frozen. It would be like, truly, gears locked up. It would be like two gears with no tolerance. They could not interact. Whatever it was that they were a part of, whatever it was that they were a part of transferring, motion and energy, could not move. Left blank. Activity, religious, philosophical activity, is to overcome this dance. It's to overcome this conflict. And it's not. It is the blank. It is what would be, I've been calling the E. This is what determines the relative position and what's going on with the other two. Not the two by themselves. They don't tell you anything. That's why no ordinary knowledge is satisfying. But that is also in part why consciousness feels that this conflict has got to be overcome. That if we could in some way overcome religious differences, racial differences, nationalistic differences, the apparent basic, uncivilized differences between humans, if we could overcome this, it would be some kind of heaven. It would be the final resting place, the ultimate Arcadia of humanity, that we would have found our Camelot. And it's not true. There's always the third part missing, that they do not understand there has to be a place for the first two to fight it out. There has to be a place for the first two to dance it out. That is what looks like, at the ordinary level, conflict. En passant, let me also point out to you that initially the word God, the idea of God, was a very early name for the E-force. I didn't say it died out, but God was a very, very early name for the E-force. And many people still have the sounds in their own wiring system. The electrochemical activities make the name, the word God, ring in their head. And what's ringing is an unanswered call from E-force. It is an area wherein they cannot understand, they cannot see what's going on, but this should be, in a crude way that consciousness can conceive of it, that this should be where everything is finally rectified. This would be the omnipresent, the omnipotent place where all childish human conflicts, mortal prejudices, would in some way be brought together under the super force, under the super chief. And I'm not referring to Count Basie now. But they say God, and I'm telling you that that was a very early name for E-force. In fact, no one has another name. Humanity still has that resounding, reverberating in its consciousness. That's not the only purpose of the idea of God, but this is one that I've never noted specifically. And there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot more in the history of your own nervous system and in the genetic pool, the genetic race of us. That is, of course, we're assuming that all of you people can get beyond your own wired up consciousness of believing old stories from Genesis, from mythology, that an old man or an old force, an unmoved mover, an uncreated creator outside of this went poof and created it. We're assuming that on a good day you can drag your consciousness somewhere afield from that and then try and get a feeling of what is it necessarily has been operating in the genes of man that comes out with the idea of a God, of a super, ultimate force, always giving it human consciousness, always reflecting the limitations of man and man's own consciousness. But what is it in that I'm not going any further into tonight, that I'm telling you that that was one of the early names, one of the earliest names of E, of the part that human consciousness cannot ordinarily perceive, the place where apparently the unnecessary conflicts are fighting it out. Well, you ought to really take both of those ideas. They're either fighting it out or they're dancing. I do that because in certain instances it would seem, even mathematically, if not poetically, or poetically, if not mathematically, more apropos to look upon a certain situation on your own as these apparent conflicts are fighting it out, whereas at other times, so as not to distract yourself, they do not appear to necessarily be fighting, but they are locked into an embrace that makes a tango look like Sunday school. They're locked into a tango, they're locked into a belly-to-belly dance, taking it to realms and edges of eroticism. Imagine sex going off at right angles to where you know what it is now. I mean, you imagine it. I do not personally want to think about it. My health has been failing as it is. At any rate, it would be something along those lines. Now to change the subject completely, do any of you begin to get a feeling of this? Not just in a poetic sense and not just in a passing comment that I throw out, but that everything, it's got to fit into here. But ordinarily all you're seeing, at the best, is 2/3 of what's going on. But keeping that in mind, if possible, that everything taking place is true. Everything that you hear about, every opinion, every religious idea, every philosophical idea, everything, well, everything in the material world that you can observe is obviously true. But of course we're dealing with this more sophisticated, more important area. The non-material world and everything that takes place there is true. What everyone should be doing, that I keep giving out piece by piece, and I could make this the pickle of a religion, interview with the potential that the gods gave a goose. That's what mystics in Alabama used to say, something like that. You should be able to see that you can create your own pickle. You can create your own disposable religion around the absolute, and I'm not going to say attempt, because everybody attempts to be religious, you would have to succeed at it, is to give continually smiling affirmation to everything that you ever hear about. The partnership can't do it in you, because the partnership is going to be dealing with what appears to be conflicts. That you hear an idea that someone says, God was a right-winger. There's no doubt about it. I have read the Bible. I have studied at that famous Billy James Hargis School of Theology in the beautiful Ozark Mountains of Missouri. I got my degree there. I have studied the Bible. I have met some of the most famous, well-known Southern Baptist and outlaw preachers, and we all agree secular humanism, liberal attitudes are the work of the devil. Now let us say that your partnership is wired up in such a way that as soon as you hear that, if you were just being conscious at the level of the partnership, there are reverberations in your nervous system, in your head, conversations going on with the radio that you just heard this comment, along such lines as, well, you fat old fool, you dumbass motherfucker, when people like you die out, maybe there'll be a chance for some progress. Or maybe it's just a laugh, maybe it's just a scoff at poor old Billy James. Not that poor old Billy James is poor old Billy. But you are not only making a mistake, not a religious, not a moral mistake, you're taking a faux pas in your own health treatment. But beyond that, you're missing the possibility of doing something in a positive way, that what you should be doing is giving a smiling affirmation. You got to know how to do it. You're not agreeing. It's just simply that everything is true. And right on, Billy James. You should be able to have a kind of joyful feel, and it's got nothing to do with what he said or him attacking those pointed-headed people who graduate from Yale and Princeton, those people who have so-called theological degrees from so-called schools like Harvard and Princeton. That's got nothing to do with it. I don't want to tell you it's funny, because some of you it's not simply funny. It's that everything is true. If cosmic forces in some way would jump out of the bushes during a full moon, during a month that has a Q in it, and ask you what you believe in after all this time, if you had the answer, if such a non-possibility did occur, what you should tell them, whoever these forces were, is be able to look them dead in the eye, assuming forces have eyes, and say, I believe in everything, and mean it. Of course, from one view, having to deal with words, that's the same thing as believing in nothing. But that's not exactly verbally the way that I would encourage you to go about it, is that you would believe in everything. And they'd be able to stop any sort of, as I said, non-possible inquisition that would verbally demand such a response from you. But if that happened, and you can do it to yourself within the partnership arrangement, that you are in favor and you believe in everything. I don't care what it was. If suddenly Billy James stood up and he gave a right-wing, conservative, radical statement, philosophically, religiously, and then suddenly a left-wing Arab jumped up, suddenly a center-of-the-road Episcopalian, suddenly some guy with green hair and waving a book you never heard of and wearing towels dyed purple shouts that God is a vegetable. It's very simple and easy to immediately want to laugh and to take me making this comment in some way that you should be tolerant. And tolerance is all right, but it's no better than stewed prunes. Tolerance is not the point, because tolerance fits into the same scheme right here, wherein I start out mentioning to you that ordinary consciousness believes that the conflicts, the dissension that seems to be running, it seems to be a mainstream running through the history of man, has got to be overcome. When people talk about tolerance, what they're saying is that we should all learn how to, in some way, put up with this. And there's nothing to put up with, because it's not going to change. If you're worried about, if I could get tolerant, I could put up with conflicting opinions. Even though I know my opinions are closer to the truth, I'd be tolerant enough to understand that these other people hadn't had the benefit, not only of my education, but they hadn't had the benefit of being me. So I'm trying to be tolerant, but what you're trying to say is, they don't understand this, but what they're trying to say is, I hope I can get to where it is agreeable and familiar to me to be dumb, to be limited in my consciousness. That's what they're praying for. Or that's what they say that they're studying for. I go to sensitivity meetings. I invite people of different religions, different races to my house. I try to go to other countries. I'm trying to expand myself to be tolerant. It sounds fine. It sounds as fine as when I die I want to go to heaven. When I die I want to go to Rome. But what they're really saying is, I wish I could be dumb enough that I didn't recognize the conflict. Now what this is about is trying to go in the other direction, if there were such a direction, is I wish I could get to the point to see this and understand there is no conflict, there is a dance, there is a wrestling match going on. And if it did not go on, we'd all be done for. If what my partnership and every other human's partnership believes would be heaven, paradise, a more humane place to live on this planet, if it came to pass, that'd be the end of us. That would be the closing chapter of humanity as we know it. Life would be done for without this, quote, conflict. It's on that basis I'm telling you that everything is true. It's got nothing to do with tolerance. Tolerance, as humanity, as ordinary consciousness would call it, tolerance would be ignorance. Tolerance would be a diminution of consciousness. I wish I could get to the point that I didn't understand that conflict was necessary. It sounds fine when people talk about it, but being tolerant won't get you anywhere. You've got to be in favor of everything. You've got to understand that there is no real conflict going on. There is no conflict between right ideas and wrong ideas. There is no conflict between goodness and anti-goodness. There is no conflict going on this planet at any time between justice and injustice. There is a shifting around. There are two parts of the universe wrestling. They wrestle a while, they dance a while. They fuck, they fight. And they got to have room to move. And part of the room they have to move is in human consciousness. That is part of the purpose we're playing in life's bloodstream and life's own nervous system. You don't see any sign of trees, roots, rocks, rhinos having any conception that there is some sort of very important mortal struggle going on. The religions never deal with this. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all of them, everywhere. It's always this dualistic idea, black against white, the truth against darkness, light against darkness, progress against regression, goodness against evil. And that man is the battleground. But no one, just ordinary consciousness, or the educated, leaders, philosophers in the religions, no one ever notices, no one's ever taken any comment, if it's that important, which to them it is literally a matter of infinite life and death. The afterlife of your soul, if it is so important, it's such a universal thing, how do they explain, or why does nobody even notice, that not only people right next to you, not people, beings, creatures, that no one else is aware of this battle, just completely oblivious to it. No one notices it, because it is not that kind of battle. It is a part of human consciousness to be, as a part of its job, to be the third place, where apparently these conflicts are wrestling and then dancing. The idea of tolerance is nothing. The idea of being able to see this, the idea of being able to make your own self conscious, to activate parts of your own nervous system that are irrational, irrelevant, to move into an area that would be perhaps necessary tomorrow, but not so now. That is how you can look into what seems to be the present, which is in fact the past. And you can see this, and there's nothing to be tolerant of, because there is no conflict going on. It's going on. There is no battle between a good and an evil. There is no battle between a right and a wrong. How can you be tolerant? There's nothing to be tolerant of. You're in favor of it. No matter what the idea that you heard expressed, no matter how frivolous, no matter how silly that it struck you, you should be in smiling affirmation of it. You should even verbally say something, even if you're sitting in the car by yourself and hear some comment on the radio. It's better than sitting there in the car alone and picking your nose and smoking. It's to speak up to the radio and say, right on. And imagine if suddenly the gods of your forefathers did pop up behind the back seat and say, what do you think of those kind of ideas? Say, love them. I'm with them. And then these forces say, yeah, but who all else are you with? I know what you are now. I'm with everybody. What are you in favor of? Everything. What do you believe in? All of it. All of it. But to be able to do that, nobody can find an exception. They can't find a place that you're intolerant, because you're not intolerant and you're not tolerant. No matter what it is, I am in smiling affirmation thereof. I'm in favor of it. I believe it. I support it. You might as well say that. If you ever begin to see what's going on, you won't have to fake it. You should not, put it another way, you should not be an ordinary foe. Now that's a part of ordinary humanity's purpose here, is you've got to be a foe. To ordinary consciousness, though, you've got to be a foe to those things that should be opposed. Injustice, hatred, evil, gloom, darkness. No matter who you are, Christian, Jew, Muslim, white, black, yellow, wherever you are, that is the feeling. Only a few people can be allowed to do this, but if you're going to pursue this, if you're ever going to see what's going on, you will be a foe to nothing. It's not theoretical, and it's not tolerance. is that you understand there is nothing to be tolerant of. That is a verbal manifestation, one of the best verbal manifestations or description of ordinary consciousness, which of course is synonymous with stupidity. It's to say, well, yes, I'm tolerant. Of course, worse than that is I try to be tolerant. But just as bad would be to say, I am tolerant. Opinions that conflict with mine, that is, opinions I know that are not right on the money. I mean, that's the way life is. I can tolerate that. You might as well wear a stupid bell around your neck so everybody can hear you coming. At least so I can hear you coming. There is nothing to be tolerant of. If there were such things as sin, and one of the sins is supposed to be hubris, which again is stupidity, but here it's just a great manifestation of it, if there was such a sin. It's for a human to say, through great effort, good breeding, decent education, yuppie clothes, I believe I'm as tolerant as the next guy, probably more so. Might as well have a bell. So if the rats can hear you coming, they say, here comes old stupid, to say I am tolerant. You might as well say I'm exceedingly dumb. You're saying there are things that I should be tolerant of. There are things going awry, but thank God I'm a little better than some uneducated bricklayer, some savage living in the jungles. I believe perhaps we'll get better somewhere down the line, the more we get educated. But at least I'm to the point that I can tolerate some of this. Might as well carry around a big sign. You know, if you're looking for stupid, and then have an arrow on the sign pointing right down here. That's what it is. There's nothing to be tolerant of. The need for a foe continued, part 17. Can you see, parenthetically, in case none of you have begun to feel it, I grow more and more weary of verbally putting together these ideas that sound as though they are processes, or that sound as though they are instant approaches you could take, which they are, except you can't do it. But to where it sounds as though here's something to do, and I'll write this down, and I'll start doing it tomorrow. I'm getting fairly well sick of it, as you used to be, because you write it down, I'll do this tomorrow, and you fucking well don't do it tomorrow. And I know it. And what makes me sick is to see some of you write it down, continue to write it down, and you don't know it yet. You've been writing it down for a year. Into parentheses. If you were to the point that you could affirm and believe in everything, can you see that you have taken away the ready foe in your partnership? Well, if you can't, you have. If you truly believed in, supported, affirmed everything, as I was describing, not tolerate, but that you believed, that really tells you nothing, but that you believed in everything, that you could look the gods in the eyes and they said, what do you believe in? And you said, everything. And they knew, no need to bring out examples. I can pull them out from religions, but they might try it. Do you believe this? Yes. Do you support? Yes. And they ask you something, an opposing idea? Yes. Right on God. I believe it. I'm in favor of it. I know it's true. Whip it on me. Keep up the good work. If you could do that, if that was the native arrangement of your molecular structure now, do you see that you have taken away the full arrangement in your partnership? And if you don't, you would have. The very thing that right now most of you can't see makes this machine run in here that keeps this activity that you call yourself and consciousness, your own perception, your own mind, that keeps it going, is a kind of friction machine. It is the feeling that there is two things going on, this me and then this not me. This thing that seems to make me want to do things, and then I suffer over them. There's the thing that says, well, do so and so, and another something here goes, no, couldn't do that. The thing that says, I should do that, and the other part goes, God, yeah, Jesus, yeah, I guess. That is what keeps you alive consciously at the ordinary level. If, in some way, this faux arrangement was snatched out, what do you think would fuel you as you are now? Could any of you even surmise, guess, smell what I have referred to as kind of accidental moments that people have had throughout history and wrote about when they can't describe what happened? The peace, the serenity, the feeling of oneness, to understand that they are part of this great race of genes, the ultimate grandfather of us all. And then it's gone, and they can't get it back. Because they're back in the full arrangement. Then they can write about it, they can encourage other people to do it, they can tell you it's possible, but they're back running off the internal friction of the partnership. Without a foe, you'd almost be speechless. Now, I'm playing with justice, because an ordinary person is not going to happen, or when it does happen, it does not benefit them. They may get a book out of it, but can operate in another way, and they end up on a state-run or privately operated home for your own good, where you'll be looked after. It's either that or you become a quasi-famous mystic for 2 weeks. Without the full arrangement, what would run you? Now, remember, I'm playing with justice because this is not the way it happens when it actually happens. But if suddenly all the internal conflicts, as you feel, exist in you, all of the so-called or often referred to ambiguities, the ambivalence of feelings and motivations, if this was suddenly wiped out, what would you do? Who would you be? What would you have to say? Other than right on, right on. If somebody insisted, are you in favor of what we're doing? And the people on the other side of the street with opposing banners holler about, how about us? Go get them, Charlie. I'm in favor of everybody, as long as I don't have to march. I'm behind all of you. Way behind. I'm behind all of you. But if you indeed were in the position, of course, you can look at this as a way to try to attempt it. As I said, I'm getting weary of doing it that way. But if you indeed, if it was possible to fake it until you could make it, that you did continually and had some specific success in a smiling manner to affirm everything that I have absolutely, as far as words and non-verbally, as far as it will go. I'm telling you the truth that everything is true. Everything. That in life which says that shit like this is insane. It's an illusion. In some way, it's just a kind of sociopathic situation between a would-be leader and a bunch of people who are weak and disoriented and couldn't find their way in life, and they're not all that successful, and they end up wanting to find somebody that seems to know what they're doing. Hell, that's true. It's some semi-madman and a bunch of undeveloped sheep. No, that's true. Certainly. Or, how about this? The guy running such as this, people who would do such as this, and they could point to me and say, people like that have a very poor image of themselves. They never could get much attention, and therefore they end up trying to get people in the situation, not like it appears, the crowd, his so-called followers, the ones actually running it, the man would be nothing without this. They're the ones actually in charge. Hell, that's true. No doubt about it. No matter what it is that you can think of, no matter what it is that could be said, if it appears to be another group of people, some segment of life getting right in your face and going to everything you believe, it's a fact. And if you don't think it's a fact, try and find yourself a damn dumbbell to hang around your neck so that you can warn off decent people when they hear you coming. It is all true. Of course, you are, if I need to remind you, we're dealing with the fact it's all true 2/3 of the way, which is all that's necessary at this level. Just because something conflicts at the ordinary level of what you know to be a fact, that doesn't mean it's not true. That means you're just dumb. That means you still believe at the ordinary level. That means that you believe that in your own partnership arrangement that you can perceive cosmic objective truth, that it exists and you can perceive it. There may not be much of it, but there are a few things in life without any doubt that are true. God, you need a dumbbell. You're going to frighten the children and other decent people when they suddenly you come around the corner and you say, wait a minute, that's not true. You shouldn't talk like that. You ought to give us warning. Of course, if you had your wits about you, you ought to give yourself warning. But that's another matter. It is all true, no matter how disagreeable it is, no matter apparently how unprofitable it is. It may only be true for a few seconds. It may only be groundwater seeping up. It may disappear. Life may dispose of it as quickly as you have disposed of certain ideas that you may have read in a book or that you may have heard and went, wow, that's important, and wrote it down and never thought about it again. But right then, it was true that you heard that idea, no matter where it came from. It was a line out of a plasmatic song that you just heard that one line and you thought, Jesus, there is a cosmic truth, and you wrote it down and put it in your little pocket. You know, the clothes went to the cleaners, the laundromat. You never saw it again, plus you never even thought about it again. But right there, you pulled over the side of the road and you pulled out a pencil and you got a matchbox, match cover, and you wrote down that. That was a fact. That was true. It doesn't matter what it was. If you were in such a position that you had your own understanding of that, you would have taken away the ordinary foe from your own internal arrangement. There would be no internal foe. You would have expanded the ability to perceive reality beyond this 2/3 of my two-dimensional circle. And what you would have in essence would be the lack of a foe. I might suggest, almost parenthetically, the notions that people have written about great religious leaders and prophets and supernatural men, and then the kinds of things that have reverberated in your own head about these kinds of people, about how serene they were, what decent people they were. One description would be that there seemed to be no internal conflict. Am I right? Yes, you're right. The way they're portrayed all the way from Cecil B. DeMille in movies to would-be witnesses at the time of these so-called religious people. And they try to paint a verbal or sometimes a artistic picture, but when they try and describe the way the person seemed, it seemed as though there were sans internal conflict. Am I right? Damn right I'm right. Nobody but a very crude sort would want to imagine a good old Moses or a Jesus making all these great speeches and doing all these good works and saying these things that are meaningful, and then go around the corner and be a real shit ass. Or to find him half drunk, sitting over in the corner, morose, with the blues. Or to have a few drinks with you and say, you know what I was talking about the other night to those people? I got thinking about that, and God, that can't be true. Jesus. I mean, who wants to be faced with that? That is not godlike. Does that not fit what I'm describing of being able to have erased or transcended the foe arrangement in your internal partnership. But it's always been looked upon as supernatural, some kind of spiritual gift. But I suggest to you that in the true sense, it would be a kind of transcending of one level of a mechanical arrangement in the molecular structure that makes up human consciousness, instead of it being limited to this binary arrangement that seems to be always two things at loggerheads, and they can never be satisfactorily rectified, which is one use of the notion of faith in religion, is that we cannot understand this. We can't understand why evil seems to triumph over good, or why our religion does not seem to be all-powerful, why all people do not seem to agree with us when we obviously know the truth. We just got to have faith. The gods. How about E-Force? The place where the so-called gods and devils are fighting it out. At times they're not dancing. Of course, religions don't want to see that Jehovah and Satan ever get together and dance. They see it as a fight. But they don't see it the place they fight would be the place that they could, if it was possible, could be conscious of a place where there is no foe. In that same area, you should note that it's not possible at the ordinary level to have a religion that has gods who have no foes. No religion has a god or any gods that are not opposed. Nobody's ever noticed this. It looks like, to be semi-facetious for a second, a few moments, why didn't some group finally come out with super religion and to point out with a super god, super religion with a super god, to point out that the rest of these religions, no matter their background, no matter the length of their history, no matter the coins in their coffers, that all of these other religions, their god always has a foe. What kind of damn God is that? And you point out, our God, Larry. We have now, it's been revealed to me, I got a God that we're talking serious godness now. He's so big, ain't nobody tried to oppose him. Nobody. That's it. No possible evil. There's no fighting over your soul. You either come over here and you join in, bask in the glory and the benefits of Larry, or you don't. But in either case, you're not going to get hurt, because there's nobody fighting over your soul. It's just a matter of whether you're smart enough to do it, or whether you got time to do it, whether you got the inclination. But if you don't, all right. But it's not a fight going on. He got no foes. We ain't talking about these small-time gods like Allah and Jehovah and God. They may well be some kind of spirits or forces somewhere, but we're talking pretty small time. This is not the National American League. We're talking about AAA ball here, folks. Larry has no foes. Now that would be God, or at least that'd be my kind of God. Another thing about this, with the ordinary religions, that is the only thing possible for ordinary consciousness, the people suitably drawn to that particular religion and that God, do you understand that they are worshiping an idea that is only 1/3 of a real deity? The only thing that they can conceive of, the only thing that is necessary, I don't care what religion, what group, is they see this as God. And of course, they see his dancing partner as being his foe. So out of the whole possibility, even given it to you in this two-dimensional drawing, in these three-dimensional verbal pictures, they are limited to, quote, worshiping an idea that is literally only 1/3 of a real deity. That's it. Now I repeat, that's Bush League. And yet that's all that's necessary. It's unsatisfying to some people, to a few people, but it's all that has been necessary. There has never been any perception, even though I got some laughs off of it, no one has ever, under ordinary conditions, since it was not necessary, ever had any perception of what I was describing of, hey, what kind of gods we got that are not really in charge. We refer to our gods, or our priests and rabbis do, as omnipresent, omniscient, and they're not, because all of them have a foe. Back when they were nowadays referred to as eras of mythology, it was not just a god, it was gods. Pre-Muhammad day with the Arab peoples, it was gods. The Jews before Moses, it was gods in the plural. But for every god, there was a foe. If it was a cow god over here and a pig god over here, and they were worshiping him, the mythology was, the tales were that the pig god had a foe by the name of Hormel, I guess. The cow god had some kind of foe. There was an anti-cow god. They all had foes. It's not a breakdown of mythology. It is not some sort of unconscious reflection of the breakdown of man's mind or his soul. It is the nature of consciousness itself. It is the chemical, it is the electrical nature of consciousness itself that projects the idea of a God, and simultaneously with every God at every place on this planet, the God has a foe, and no one's ever perceived. No one's ever had a question about, what kind of God is this that he has a foe? A real God would have no foes. Let me try something else on you. If some of you do get to the place that the absolute molecular structure in here is such that you no longer are dealing with the illusion that inside of you is a little Fred or a Mary and in everybody else there is, that this is no longer some mystery. This is no longer some entangled ball of yarn that you're trying to unroll in the way in which it supposedly was rolled up, trying to relive your history and the traumas and bruises of being alive, of trying to understand your inexplicable environment, to get beyond all of that. And it's so that internally you had no foe. Can you see that vis-a-vis the situation with ordinary consciousness right here, if you had transcended, in other words, halted this normal internal arrangement of a thing of me in here and then somebody else, if you have transcended that, do you understand that you would then have twice as much room for that dance to to go on. If your consciousness is this kind of partnership, this duality, then even though at the ordinary level you don't perceive it, there is always the E. That's where the partnership is wrestling. That's the only way that you continue to suffer. That's the only way that you continue to make the appearance of efforts to change. That's the only way you can live with this. Or else the whole machinery of so-called consciousness would freeze up if it didn't have room to dance and to fight. Of these feelings, I want to do so-and-so, and then you don't. Or the feelings that I should stop doing something I'm doing, and you don't stop it. You don't see at the ordinary level of consciousness that even though there is no continuing perception of there being a third force holding everything together, that is the place that the other two that apparently are conflicting in you, whether they be called desires, motivations, religious feelings, no matter what you call them, subconscious and conscious desires, E is there because that's the place that they go to dance. That's the place they go to fight. If you had no such arrangement of there being this foe, you understand that they would not just have E, they would have twice that much room to dance in. Now, as to what that might mean to you in the spirit of good cheer and brotherhood and further education, I think I'll just ignore and leave to you. But you would have twice as much room. If that doesn't give you any encouragement, look, at the ordinary level right now, the thing is that internally you got no room. Which I'm saying is not correct, but the thing is I got no room. If I had any room to maneuver, I could be able to stop some of my bad habits. I could do better. I could make progressive change. But I don't know. Every time I think of something that I should be doing or I think I would like to do, I don't know. It's just I can't seem to get a grip on it. I can't even seem to make any movement there. It's always something. There's just no room. There's room, all right, or you wouldn't be alive. But you would have twice as much room if you had no foe. I've got a couple of like little neuralizing bombs. One is the few people, and I'm referring to those, I'm referring to whoever the hell I'm referring to, aren't I? The few. Are they a people with no history, or people with too much? I can assure you that somewhere down the road, those of you that do begin to find out what's actually going on, you can, in one sense, correctly perceive or feel as though that you have dropped the history of you in the ordinary sense. That the kinds of things that I have given this task or said you ought to tattoo on your forehead are pointing out to you that ordinary history is irrelevant for someone attempting this. That in a sense, it doesn't exist. If whatever happened to you, just claptrap, just meaningless, just forget it. But then the reality, I'm suggesting in this question, the reality might be that it's no longer an effort, that you may actually have no history. And it might strike you for a few seconds that, boy, I wish I could bottle this and sell it and I'd make a fortune. Based upon the way I always felt, and obviously the way almost everybody else on this planet feels. They're being plagued, they're being driven semi-nutso, wishing they could have their father dug back out of the ground and revived so that I could apologize to him and beg his forgiveness. I wish my second wife would come back to me so I'd tell her I'd quit drinking. I wish my children could return back to the age of 15 so that I could try and raise them in a different manner. I wish I could go back to being 18 again, and I would take a different course in my life. If you had no history, I assure you, those of you that have a entrepreneurial turn of mind, it'll strike you for a few moments that, Jesus, if I could turn this into a tonic and sell it, money back guarantee, just tell people, it'll wipe out your memory, but other than that, you'll be as conscious, you'll be like everybody else, you just won't have your memory. You could quit work. But, on the other hand, if that has any verbal validity, then the apparent opposite has got to have some. You know that by now, don't you? Well, nobody wants to fool with it. So the neuralizing rhetorical bomb, or perhaps a small squid or firecracker, was my question: is it that the few have no history, or is it that they have too much? Because I can tell you that in a sense you have got more history than the ordinary people, or you wouldn't be here. There are aspects of your genetic code that are fidgety, that are active in a way that ordinary people's are not. That is assuming that all of you in the sound of my voice actually belong in this. That in a sense you have more history than ordinary people. You do. It's more alive. Your nervous system has a greater memory. Not necessarily verbally, and without it leading to something else, it by no means is necessarily profitable. It can, in fact, even though you might not know my description of it, you would find the arrangement to be disagreeable. That I have always been too inquisitive, too upset, I keep searching, I wish I could just settle down and get a job, or just, I wish I could just be an ordinary middle-class shit kicker. I'd probably be better off. I'm telling you, no, I'm suggesting to you that that might be a matter of too much history. And of course, no one has a partnership crude enough on the sound of my voice to say, well, wait a minute, they both can't be true, when you know goddamn well they can. How about another one? It has been said in the annals of man's history, from one person to another person, even to a group of people, the statement that if you're not for us, whoever these people are, if you're not for us, and of course what they stand for, if you're not for us, you're against us. But then it's also been said, believe it or not, same kind of situation. Some group, spokesman for some group, says to another person or another group, says, all right, here's the reality of it. Here's our operative procedure. If you're not actively against us, you're for us. Now, this is not quite as verbally cut and dried as a paradigmatic situation of C against D. X against Y, green against purple, short against fat, lean against extended, north against fuchsia. But I ask you this. Is there a difference in those two expressions, the reality behind them? I ask you further, is it possible that a non-negative is the same as an apparent positive? That is, the comment, the reality behind the comment, this idea, which is a transfer of energy. It's something that life is needed, remember. This is not just some political statement, no matter the apparent political context in which these two circumstances would have normally arisen. We're talking about a necessary transfer of energy somewhere in life's body. Is the, relatively speaking, if we're going to look at two possible forces, well, the third one being the determining factor, that the one comment that is made that, all right, if you people are not actively against us, if you're not against us, you're for us. Let's call that the non-negative. And the other one that, hey, if you're not for us, you're against us. And call that the positive, that you're stating it's got to be one way or the other. Can the first one be synonymous with the second? Could they be of equal importance? Could they be of equal power in whatever purpose they're serving? And if so, or even if not, I point out to you that we're not talking about political comments. And the apparent example of one person speaking to another person or group and asking or saying, if you're not for us, you're against us. Or, if you're not actually against us, you're for us. That only has any validity in your own molecular, in your own genetic framework. Because that situation goes on. You have just never noticed it. And it appears to be two different aspects. In some of you, one of the aspects has never been voiced before. What is the difference, if any? And is it possible that there is no difference? Is it possible that a non-negative, apparently a non-negative, can have the same power, efficiency, and purpose as what would appear to be a directly positive idea? I think I'm going to conclude by offering you the possibility of a small hobby. Don't anyone ever bother to ask me about this. If any of you ever care to comment or you write anything, you can, of course, send it to me, but don't bother to ever ask me about this. Since I've already mentioned it to one person and it seemed to grab them by their intriguing handle, I'm going to tell you something. In the ordinary flow of things, just the ordinary history of man, I'm talking about down to the detailed academic level that history has been studied, there is a specific time, which is, of course, compels me point out that there's also a specific area on life's body on this planet. But at a particular time / place in the history of man, the known history of man, I'm not talking about prehistorical times, not by any means. There is a specific hole in man's history that people do not realize. Nobody. And I'm telling you this on the basis that there's no reason they should notice it unless you find out what it is. And then it is, to use academic terminology, it is glaring as hell. It is an almost staggering black hole in the history of humanity. And I repeat again to give you some hint, I am not talking about prehistory by any means. But it's a specific time and a specific place that there is an absolute hole in the flow of history. and nobody notices it. And it's very important where things seem to be going, and then it hits a black hole, and it seems to pick back up. And nobody notices it. And if you get even a glimpse of it, you'll understand what I mean when I say at the ordinary level, and then some, it is glaring. But the perception mechanism and the need on the ordinary level is not there for humanity to notice it. But in case any of you need a hobby, it's there. You can't start off, I might add, and try to use some ordinary means. But it's there. And it's there for a reason. Like I said, don't ever ask me about it, because if there was something I had to tell you, I got to consider this possibility once I became aware of it. Life may not want to be reminded of it. There's always that possibility that life through man has forgotten a certain and just because I realize it, it's not necessarily that I point it out to everybody, because life may not want to be reminded of it. But everything around the whole, very important, not in a three-dimensional manner, but it is right in the main color scheme of the tapestry of life, the civilized growth of life, and it hits a place and there is a whole. Such a magnitude of such importance that it's just triply, or it should be if you get a glimpse of it, triply or quadruply fascinating as how this could be, and no one ever notices it. People that have spent their life, have several degrees in history, world authorities, even on this specific time in man's history. And they don't notice that things went right along. And it was like somebody cut off the TV set. It's like somebody took a strip of film in this movie, cut it out, put it right back together, the two ends, and threw away this part. And it flows right along, and everybody looks, yeah. And then it goes, zoom. They go, yeah. You've read about it, never noticed it. It's not as simple now as just three-dimensional time taking a break. It's nothing simple. But there is a whole. And that concludes tonight's festivities.